Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today, sorry I'm just cleaning up my desk a little bit, we are looking at Wir singen dir, Emmanuel, which translates to We sing to you, Emmanuel, actually very similar to English there, maybe the most quasi-English sounding title we've had so far. Interesting chorale for a couple of reasons. Number one being the fact that we're in 12/8, pretty cool. The chorale's relatively short, even though we're analyzing a relatively lengthy harmonic rhythm. It's almost as if each beat can be subdivided over the span of 3 eighth notes if it wanted to, but Bach doesn't ever go to that level of extensiveness, I suppose. But the chorale's fairly straightforward. Let's just hop right into it. So, 1 sharp in the key signature. We start on G major, we end on G major. I reckon we're in the key of G major. We then have D, D, A, and F sharp, which is our 5-chord D major. And then we have G, D, B, and E. And something interesting kind of goes on here. I think we have a mid-phrase modulation. You could even analyze the beginning of this chorale in D major if you wanted to, but if you look ahead with this C sharp right here, this undeniably, these next 2 chords, or I guess 3 chords, sound like we're in the key of D major, so I do think we get a mid-phrase modulation. We could analyze it in G major, it just sounds like D major for this excerpt, so I do think there is a mid-phrase modulation. D major now becomes our tonic. E minor 7 over G becomes 2-6-5. We know that Bach loves 2-6-5 chords, especially in cadential situations, and this isn't a cadence, but it's a cadential progression for sure. This A is an on-chord tone, this C sharp's an on-chord tone, this E is an on-chord tone, this A is an on-chord tone, making this a 5-chord A major, and then we, cadence on D major, D, D, A, and F sharp, which is our tonic triad and root position. Also, before we go any further, there are instrumental interludes in this chorale. I shortened it so I didn't have to occupy as much real estate on the page because we're only really looking at the voices, but the harmony is we're only looking at the harmony and the voices. The instrumental interludes might play a role in terms of shaping the modulations that occur in between the phrases, but I didn't really find that there was too much of that in this chorale, if any at all. It definitely, in previous chorales that have had instrumental interludes, there have been some suspicious direct modulations, but I don't see that being the case in this particular chorale. But with the naturalization of this C right here, which is just an anticipation, I do believe D is now turning back into 5 in the key of G major. And then we go to G, C, G, and D, the C being a 4-3 suspension over the bass. This is our tonic triad. And as we're getting ready for sort of a faux perfect authentic cadence, I forgot to take the fermatas out. That was there to help me visually, just have a visual landmark for me to see where the cadential points were, because in between each fermata and the beginning of each phrase, there's a couple of measures of instrumental interlude. But this is approximately where there are cadences happening in the voices. The instruments do continue, though. After G major, we have C, B, G, and E. And where you could analyze this as C major 7, I think there's something more going on here. I think this B is a 7-6 suspension over the bass, and this G is sort of an accessory to that same thing. It's just jumping up to C. So C, A, C, and E is 2-6, A minor over C, which makes typically more sense in a perfect authentic cadence. We tend to see 2-6 much more frequently. And then we have D, D, B, and F sharp, again with another suspension here. This one's a 6-5 suspension, so not quite as tense because there aren't any dissonances involved. However, it's still a suspension nonetheless, or I guess functioning as an accented non-chord tone. Still, D major is being implied here because of the resolution we get on the 3rd eighth note of the beat, and then we cadence on G major, G, D, B, and G, which is our tonic triad and root position. Okay, looking ahead, we have another one of these interesting sort of plagal / imperfect authentic cadences, depending on how you look at it. This has become kind of a regular occurrence in the chorales as of late, but it's more of a recent thing rather than ones that we've encountered in the past, or chorales that, in proportion to the chorales that we've looked at in the past, it's definitely more of a recent occurrence. But we are going to move to the key of E minor at some point, and I think it happens very, very late in the phrase. We pretty much stay in G major for the whole phrase. So we get G, D, B, and G, which is another tonic triad, no need to reanalyze, passing 7th in the bass, and then we have E, E, B, and G, which is our 6th chord, E minor, 1 going to 6, probably the most normative of thirds progressions. And then we have B, F sharp, B, and D. There's an argument here to be made that this is a 3 chord, but for the same reason that I think, this 4-7 chord is actually a 2-6 chord, I think this F sharp's an accented non-chord tone. It's the leading tone, and I think this G is actually the chord tone here, so I think this is just 1-6. But the difference between 3 and 1-6 is very minuscule. I think both analyses are accurate. We then have F sharp, D, A, and D, which is our 5 chord, D major in first inversion, passing 7th in the melody, and then we get G, D, G, and B, which is our tonic triad, G major. Then we have 3 voices moving. E is a non-chord tone, E is a non-chord tone again, and then we have C, which is also a non-chord tone, and that spells C major over E, which is 4-6. And then we get F sharp, A, and D, which is 5-6, D major over F sharp, and then it turns into like an A almost melodic minor fragment, but this is deceptive in the sense that this A minor is not going to become our tonic. It will be our tonic momentarily, but it's just an accessory to the cadence. This G sharp is just a secondary leading tone. But I do still think we're in the key of G major through the secondary dominant. It's one of those kind of modulations. So G sharp's passing, B is passing, this E is a non-chord tone as well, it's an anticipation, and we have G sharp, B, E, and D, which is 5-6-5 of 2, because E is the dominant of A, and A is our 2 chord in the key of G major. And then we get A, C, E, and C, which is our 2 chord in the key of G major, so it resolves where we would expect. And in the key of E minor, it's also our 4 chord. And this is where the cadence becomes a little bit nebulous. If you're looking purely on downbeats or numbered beats, you have 4 going to 1, E, E, G, and B, making this a plagal cadence. But if you look closely on the and of the beat, this E is a chord tone, this G is a 7th, but not on the beat, so it's a non-chord tone for us. We have A, D sharp, F sharp, and C, which is D sharp fully diminished 7th over A, which is, these are both non-chord tones as well. This would be 7-4-3 going to 1. So if you include this chord here, 4-7-1 is definitely an imperfect authentic cadence. But if you look at those as non-chord tones and they're just embellishing the 4 chord, it's a plagal cadence. And I think the argument's maybe a little less strong for plagal cadence in comparison to the other plagal imperfect authentic cadences, or just plagal / authentic cadences we've seen as of late. But I think that's entirely up to you. I think there are arguments for both. It just depends on what your relationship with the tones are. And we have an interesting harmonic rhythm here too. It's happening over the course of 3/8 notes rather than 2, so that's interesting and probably plays a role as well. But looking ahead, we have another phrase kind of akin to the first phrase in the sense that we have a mid-phrase modulation, but we do wind up in D major by the end of it. But we go to D major through G major, even though our visitation to G major is rather brief. So we get E, E, G, and B. That's another tonic triad, root position, passing 7th in the bass. And then we have C, E, G, and E, which is C major, root position. That is a 6 chord in the key of E minor, 1 going to 6. We've seen this in the past in this progression here, but I think this is our gateway back to the key of G major. It's now our 4 chord. We have some passing tones going on as well. We have B, D, G, and E. Another E minor chord, but this time it's an E minor 7. I don't know exactly how much this 6 chord is contributing to the texture, but I suppose I will analyze it because it is intact and the bass is moving, and the harmonic rhythm is throwing me off a little bit, so I'm just going to analyze it to be on the safer side of things. So we do have another another E minor chord, but I think we're in the key of G major by this point. But then again, we're presented with a zone. You could analyze this whole phrase in G major if you wanted to. I just don't hear it in the key of G major as early as the beginning of the phrase. But here we have E, C, G, and E. That is another C major chord, this time in first inversion. So this 6-4-3 chord is kind of like a substitute for 5, in the sense that, you know, we have D in the lower voices. We have D and D. Did I say B is one of these? These are both Ds. And if they're both Ds, no, that's fine. It still could be a 6-4-3 chord. It's kind of like a substitute for 5. 5 and 6, 7 do share one tone in common. That is D. And the fact that they do share that tone in common, really, if you look in the bass, because D is being doubled, the 7th of the chord is being doubled. I'm actually going to walk this back and not put it on the page because second inversion, 7th chord, with the 5th or the 7th doubled, it's kind of an interesting thing. Yes, the chord is there, but I don't really think that the doubling of the D in the lower voices really contributes all too much to there being a change of chord here. But we do have this pattern of 4 going to 4-6, and the fact that we have this sort of quasi-5 chord in the bass, the fact that the 5th of the scale is being doubled here is interesting. Yeah, because we would expect like a 5... we would expect a 3-6 chord, not a 5-6 chord. Apologies. The pattern of 4 going to 3 going to 4 is follows this idea that Bach takes chords that are separated by an inversion, like in this case 4 versus 4-6, and then he bridges the gap with a chord that is a diatonic step below it and in first inversion. So in this case 4-3-6 4-6. We have the first inversion makings of a B minor triad, but we have G and E in the upper voices, so don't have the entire context there. And actually, because I removed that chord, I don't have to write 4-6 again. I could just write 6. This C is a chord tone. This A is a non-chord tone. It kind of turns it into a 2-6 chord. But I don't, for the same reason, I just don't really feel like there's another chord progression going on, like 4 going to 2. I suppose I could mark it. Yeah, it just, I don't know. My intuition's kicking in here and it just doesn't feel significant enough to me. But we do get G major eventually, G, D, D, and, sorry, G, B, B, and D, which is our tonic triad in G major. So really what's being implied here is just a big plagal progression, 4 going to 1 over the span of many beats, 3 beats. But this is eventually going to be our gateway to the key of D major. It is now our 4 chord. We also have C sharp, A, and E here. All of them are non-chord tones. G, C sharp, A, and E is like a 5-4-2 chord, or just a passing 5 chord. This G would be a chordal 7th. It depends on how, if you view this like a suspension or just a pedal tone, it might change the way that you analyze, but there's some type of 5 chord going here. And the fact that it resolves, the 7th resolves the way we would expect, I think strengthens that argument as well. We do go to D major, D, D, A, and F sharp in first inversion. 5-4-2 to 1-6 is a pretty staple progression. This B is a non-chord tone, this B is a non-chord tone, and it kind of turns the chord into a 6 chord, B, D, B, and F sharp right here. And this feels, I don't know why this one feels more important for me to mark in comparison to this one right here. If that's the case, then I suppose I should mark this. Then we have C, C, A, and E, which is like a 2-6 chord, just to be, contiguous, is that the word that I'm thinking of? Just so that there's consistency between when I'm analyzing two voices that are moving in one context versus another. Okay, then we have E, G, B, and G, which is a 2 chord, E minor, or sorry, yeah, no, it's a 2 chord. We're in D major. It is a 2 chord in root position, kind of interesting. Then we have F sharp, D, A, and F sharp. That's a D major in first inversion, which is, sorry, not 5-6. We're in the key of D major. That is 1-6. 2 going to 1, always interesting. Here, 1 is sort of like a sub for 3, or for something that has F sharp in the bass. So the fact that 2 is going to 1, it's also, the reason why I'm commenting on this is because of the fact that 2 going to 1 is one of the least common progressions. We do see it sometimes. We've even seen Bach cadence with it. But typically it's never just a clear-cut progression where we have 2 going to 1 in root position. There's always something that muddies the progression or adds a level of nuance to it, which I think is interesting. And in this case, 1 is inverted, the chord progression is subdivided. There are a couple things contributing to it being not as strong of a chord progression as some of the other chord progressions we've seen, like 5 going to 1, for example. After our 1-6 chord, we have G, D, B, and E, which is E minor 7 over G, that's 2, 6, 5. A, C sharp, A are all non-chord tones. This E is a chord tone. That would make this a 5 chord. And then we cadence on D major, D, F sharp, A, and D, which is our tonic triad in root position. And for our last phrase, we're going to go back to the key of G major for the entirety of the phrase, and we're going to get a lot of subdivision over the span of our complete measure here. So I think D does turn into our 5 chord in the key of G major. And we start things off with a bit of a deceptive progression. We have E, E, B, and G, which is our 6 chord, E minor. This G here kind of takes the chord and puts it in first inversion. It's a chord tone, so I'll mark it off of the harmonic rhythm, but still maybe contributing a little bit to the chord progression. And then we have A, E, C, and F, which is F minor 7 flat 5 over A. It's a 7, 6, 5 chord. And then we have G, D, and B going on with this F sharp here. So there is this, or sorry, this is not a G, wrong clef. B, D, B, and F sharp, which is B minor. Makes a little bit more sense than a tonic 7 chord. We did see evidence of a tonic 7 chord in yesterday's chorale. Check out that episode if you want to see my thoughts or hear my thoughts about that. But 7 going to 3 is much more normative. It's the cycle of falling fifths, and that's a chord progression we would expect to see when a 7 is involved. And then we have G, D, B, and E, which is E minor 7 over G, which is another 6-5 chord. I do see a pattern emerging here. And then we get A, C, and A, all non-chord tones, making this A minor. That is a 2 chord. We see a very true to form cycle of falling fifths progression here, 7, 3, 6, 2. And we do have a 5 chord afterwards, F, C, A, and D. Bach is chaining 6-5 chords with root position triads on the offbeat, or I keep on calling it the offbeat. I do suppose that's an accurate title for it, but off of the harmonic rhythm. Even the harmonic rhythm does seem to be 1, then 3, then 1, then 3, then 1, then 3 for this particular measure. But then afterwards we have G, B, G, and D, which is our tonic triad, 7, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. All we need is a 4 chord, and lo and behold, we do get it, C, C, G, and E, just on the other side of 1. And the chord progression does get a little unusual here. We do have D, B, G, and D, which is a passing 1-6-4 chord, G major over D. And as we close in on the cadence, it's not an unusual chord to see, but the fact that we have E, C, G, and C, which is a 4-6 chord here, really, we have a situation similar to this chord right here, where we have D, D, G, and E, where this, I guess, E minor 7 chord over D is sort of functioning as this substitute for 3-6, as we would expect to see in this case here, because we have the same bass going on. We have D, and in this case B, but we have all the makings with the notes that are happening off of the harmonic rhythm to make a B minor triad, which is what we would expect to bridge the gap here. But this G being held over changes the root of the chord. And then we have D, D, G, and B. Again, another 1-6-4 chord happening off of the harmonic rhythm, but we're even closer to the cadence here, so maybe we're going to see it utilized in expected cadential fashion, but actually it gets interrupted. We have C, E, G, and A, which is A minor 7 over C, which is a 2-6-5 chord. And then we have D, D, F, and A. The D, this D and F sharp are all non-chord tones, but they do complete the perfect authentic cadence that we have, or I guess these are all quasi cadences, because, well, actually this cadence at the end is not a quasi cadence. That actually is the end of the movement, but all of the other cadences are implied by the progression and have the same effect as a cadence without all of the music coming to a halt. But yeah, we do end on G major, G, B, D, and G, which is our tonic triad, and we pretty routinely spend the rest of the chorale from basically the beginning of the phrase to the end, subdividing every beat of the harmonic rhythm, and we see a very deliberate cycle of falling fifths progression, which is pretty neat. We very seldom see them that intact. We usually see it fragmented, 6 going to 2, 2 going to 5, 4 going to 7, etc. But here we see one entirely intact, and that's pretty cool. The textbook author lives for examples like this. But on that note, that's going to conclude my analysis. As far as interesting points are concerned, mid-phrase modulations are always pretty interesting. Cycle of falling fifths, we have an interrupted 1-6-4-5 here, and I do analyze that with a broken bracket, as opposed to a solid bracket for when the 1-6-4 and the 5 are next to one another. But typically when we do see the 1-6-4 and the 5 separated, it is by that lower neighbor tone that the A minor 7 is doing there. Other than that, we're in 12/8. That's pretty interesting. And for all other intents and purposes, this chorale's fairly straightforward. So if you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You could also hit the notification icon if you're interested in getting a daily notification of when I upload my daily analysis. And you could also like the video if you enjoyed the content. That helps my video get seen by more people and helps grow the community of people who love Bach, people who love analysis, and people who are people who engage in theory, which is really, really awesome. Something that I've been really happy about the channel is that people have been enjoying the content. So with all that being said, thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.